Hey guys, so a couple of you asked me to remake that video that shows you how to knit a hat with ear flaps. So I finally got around to doing it. And just a quick note that this is a remake video and it's a lot slower and more detailed than ones I've made in the past. So if you're more used to my really quick tutorials, go watch the old video. Here's the hat. I changed the color of the yarn, but it's basically the exact same thing. In the last video, I changed a couple of things in the pattern for the hat, but I pretty much kept to her instructions for this one. I'm going to put it on and show you guys what it looks like. And there's the hat. So if you guys want to make this hat, then keep watching for the rest of the tutorial, and thank you. For this tutorial, I'm going to be using size US 10 double pointed needles, and you need about 5 of those. I'm also going to be using size US 10 circular knitting needles, and I'm using the 29 inches, but it's recommended that you use 16 inches. It's just easier, but these were the only ones that were available to me. So if you are going to make the hat, I suggest using 16, even though I'm going to be using 29. I'm going to be using this type. These are optional, but you can use a crochet hook to weave in the ends, and knitting markers come in handy when you start to decrease or increase. So yeah, let's get started. For this hat, I'm going to be following the pattern to the dot, and the first row is to cast on 5 stitches. So I've already made my slip knot, and I'm going to cast on 5 stitches to the DP ends, and this is how I cast on. You can use whatever method is comfortable to you. This one's just the most comfortable to me. So I have 5 stitches cast on, and the next row, the instructions for the next row is to knit front and back for the first stitch, knit the next 3, and then knit front and back for the last stitch. That's just an increase row. So you're going to increase the first and last stitches, but knit the middle 3. So here's row 2, knit front, and then you're gonna knit in the back also. It's a little tricky. So knit through the back, and then you can take the stitch off the left needle. Then you're going to knit the next 3 stitches, and then for the last stitch you're going to knit front and back. So knit front, and before you take off the stitch from the left needle, you're going to knit again in the back. Okay. So that completes row 2, and you should now have 7 stitches. So this is row 3, you're just going to knit every stitch. So you still have 7 stitches on this row. Then you're going to repeat row 2, which is, again, you knit the front and back of the first stitch and knit front and back of the last stitch. So this is row 4, you're going to knit front and back in the first stitch. So knit front and then knit back. And then you're going to knit each stitch until the last. last stitch, you knit front and then you knit back. So now there should be 9 stitches on your needle. This is going to be row 5, where you just knit every single stitch. For row 6, again, you're going to knit the front and back of the first stitch and knit the front and back of the last stitch. And every single stitch in between, you just knit regularly. So here's row 6, knit front, knit back, and then knit all the stitches in between. And then for the last stitch, knit front and knit back. So now there should be 11 stitches, and for the next row, you're just going to knit every single stitch. Okay, this is going to be our last increasing round, where you knit front and back in the first and last stitches. So the first stitch, knit front, knit back, knit all the stitches in between. Last stitch, knit front, knit back. Now you should have 13 stitches on the needle. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13. And from now on, for the rest of the ear flap, you're just going to knit each and every row. You're not going to increase anymore. You're just going to keep knitting until the piece reaches about 3¼ inches. This is called garter stitch, where you just knit every row. Alright, so I just finished knitting my first ear flap, and it actually turned out to be 4 inches. I know I said 3¼ but I accidentally made mine a little longer, and I think I'm just going to keep it this way. It's your preference, whatever you like. And now leave about doesn't have to be precise, but leave about a 6-inch tail and just cut it off. Put the first ear flap aside for now, and you're going to make the exact same thing again. This is going to be the second ear flap, unless you have one ear, which probably wouldn't be a very good looking hat. So cast on 5 stitches again, and you're just going to repeat the exact same process to make a... Alright, I just finished with my second ear flap, and it's also 4 inches. What's more important is that it matches with the first ear flap. So just make sure that they're identical. Otherwise, you're going to have mismatched ear flaps. At this point, it's time to bust out your circular knitting needles. Here's mine. And you're going to take the second ear flap, the one that you just knitted that you haven't cut off yet, and transfer all these stitches onto the circular needles. Alright, so my second ear flap is on my circular needles. Now you're going to cast on an extra 19 stitches. And be sure to make your stitches really loose. Alright, now I've already cast on my next 19 stitches. This is the base of the hat. The next step is to attach the first ear flap onto the hat. I have my first ear flap on the double pointed needle on my left hand and the circular needle on my right hand. And you're just going to keep knitting like you would continuously knit any other project. So here it goes. Alright, so now the hat is on, both of the ear flaps are on the circular knitting needle. And you're no longer going to be using the DPNs at this point. The next step is to cast on an extra 14 stitches onto the circular needles. So I'm just going to keep casting on. That's 1. Alright, now I have another 14 stitches on the circular needles. That's on top of the 2 ear flaps and the 19 that I cast on earlier. So what you're going to do now is join the first and the last stitches in the round, but make sure to not twist the stitches. Right now they're not twisted, and I'm going to keep it that way because then you'll pay for it later on. So it's going to be a lot tougher for me to do this because I'm using 29 inches. That's why I recommend 16 inches, but I'll just have to make do. So now I'm going to join the stitches in the round. So this is how you join. You put the stitch from the left needle onto the right needle. It's going to be a little tricky, right? And then you also drag the second stitch or the first stitch on the right needle over that stitch that you just moved. And there you go, that's how you join. And now you're going to continue in garter stitch, which is knit one row and purl one row for the border of the hat. So just knit in the round, and you're just going to continue knitting this entire first row. I'm going to place a marker here so that I know where I began. Alright, so I've knitted all the way around and I'm going back to round 2, which means I'm going to purl the next row. So you're going to keep knitting one row, purling one row, knitting one row, and that's called garter stitch for the rest of the border, and you can make it however long you want it, but I'm going to make my border about 2 inches.